formula, when to use a formula, types of formulas, and the resources that you have at your disposal. Throughout the way, we will have survey questions and exercises to make this as interactive as possible. We'll also be providing you all with additional reference material that you can look to after the session. Our main goal coming out of this is for you all to better understand the fundamentals of formulas and be able to incorporate them into your QuickBase applications. And for an introduction, I'm Alana Whipp. I'm a senior manager here at QuickBase. I've been leveraging QuickBase now for just over 7 years, initially as a customer in the transportation industry. And at QuickBase, prior to being a senior manager for the PMO, I was a senior orientation customer success manager. So really excited to be here with all of you today. Unfortunately, it's not in person, but we'll do as good as we can virtually.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gilmore, and I'm a senior orientation manager here at QuickBase. And prior to that, I was a customer, worked in project controls, did some work for mechanical contractors and electrical utilities here in the Portland, Oregon area. And I was doing that for roughly 7 years prior to joining QuickBase. And I'm also a New Mexican green chili fanatic. So love to talk about green chili anytime.
Awesome. So a few housekeeping items that we just want to mention before we dive into the content. As I said, this session will be recorded, including the chat, just so everyone is aware. Also, if you do want to refer back to this at a later date, like I said, this will be recorded, so you can watch us again if you really want to. Also, Lee and I, along with a handful of colleagues, will be available in the chat and Q&A throughout the presentation. So feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A portion. We'll try to monitor both the chat and Q&A, but questions, if you can please refer to the Q&A button, that would be awesome. And also, we will do our best to leave about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to do a live Q&A. Also, we will send a reminder to you all at the very end of this session, but if you all don't mind taking 30 seconds at the end of this presentation to rate our session and share any feedback, we'll go ahead and post the link in the chat for you all. All right, so I know that a lot of folks are asking this in the chat, but before we actually get started with our exercises, if you all have not yet downloaded our Exchange app, if you all don't mind doing this right now, the title of our app is Empower 2020-Introduction to Formulas. You should be able to access this from your homepage within QuickBase. On the right-hand side, you'll see Explore Sample Apps. That's where you can go ahead and download this application. And then I believe the next slide just says if you don't have access to download an app in your company's realm or in the realm that you're currently logged into, if you wanted to go ahead and create a builder account, you can also download this Empower app through the account. I know that it sounds like a few folks are having difficulty downloading the app. We will go through the majority of the exercises in this session, so you can always follow along with us, and then at a later date, if you're able to download the app, you can use that more for reference and to kind of test yourself with the examples that we go through today. So before we go into our slide portion of the presentation, we, like I said, wanted to make this a bit interactive. So if you all don't mind going to menti.com using the code 955067, we just wanted to get a pulse of how you all feel with formulas in general for QuickBase. So if you don't mind going there. Okay, a little bit, awesome. Not at all, perfect, that's why we're here. Perfect. And I will say, if you're on the very end, you might want to join the experienced formula session that's happening right now. Obviously, we're more than happy to have everyone, but just want to make sure that you get the most out of these sessions. Awesome. Very cool. It looks like you all are in the right place. Perfect. All right, so we can go back to our presentation and we'll start talking about formulas. All right, so first, what is a formula? So if you all joined the keynote this morning, they did talk about formulas a bit, but just to reiterate at a very high level, a formula is really a field within a table of your QuickBase application that uses existing data or hard-coded data to derive new data. A few examples of use cases include calculating the total cost of a product, generating a due date based on a start date and a set amount of time, and checking a box when an item is due or not yet complete. Obviously, there are lots of iterations to what you can use formulas for, but the ones that I just mentioned are a handful of those that we'll go through today. And then when to use a formula. So I personally like to think of formulas as being the first point of attack when needing something automatic to occur within a QuickBase form or table. There is a lot of functionality within QuickBase, but I would say formulas are normally your first stop before going into the more complex options that you may have. As I mentioned, the purpose of a formula is to really perform a calculation that you would otherwise have to do by hand manually. So the formula, the whole purpose of it is to really change dynamically depending on variables that are included within the formula, so you don't have to worry about any sort of manual intervention that you would have to otherwise do if you're not using QuickBase. There is one example that Lee and I had actually talked about before the session that we wanted to make sure we called out for you all regarding, how a formula is dynamic. It's that technically, when a variable changes from false to true, it could just as easily go back to false, as in a box one day could be unchecked and then it could be checked, and the next day it could be unchecked again. So this example that I have here is just one example, just something to think about when you're developing a formula to make sure that it is providing you the result that you want. Where if you have a date in a form that is today, you want to check that box, meaning the day before the specified date, the box would be unchecked. And the day after the specified date, that box would be unchecked. So as long as you're aware that you only want a box checked one day, you're good to go. Otherwise, you might want to think of another way to write the formula so that your box would be checked, on that day or beyond, or before that day up to that specific day. So just something to think about, since it's not hard coded, it could change depending on how you write your formula. All right, and the basics. So for those of you that did the Menti and were on the left side with not much familiarity or very little, these are the basics that I live by when I'm building a formula in QuickBase. So first, they're written the exact same way we read, left to right, top to bottom. If you're familiar with Excel formulas at all, the majority of this will make sense to you. There are a few differences, but I'll definitely call those out. So first, within the formula, you will most definitely see brackets, and those brackets note existing fields within your table. So anytime you are calling out a specific field name that you do want to incorporate into your formula, there will be brackets around that field name. The quotes specify text. So the one thing that I would like to call out here is when you potentially copy and paste a formula from, say, community or another resource when you're trying to get information about how to incorporate a text field into a formula, you might notice that you have curly quotes. You just want to make sure that you use straight quotes. An ampersand concatenates fields together, concatenates values together, and we'll go through an example to make that clearer for you all. And an or, so similar to Excel where you evaluate if multiple conditions are true. Same thing in QuickBase. The one difference, which we'll have an example on, is that you do not put these operators at the beginning of the formula. You actually include them in the middle between the conditions. The parentheses, similar to elementary arithmetic, it's for order of operations. And these are also just used in standard functions. If you have an if statement, you would put the parentheses around that entire statement. There are two different ways that you could show text not being equal to each other. One is the less than and greater than sign, and then the other is the exclamation mark equal to sign. This is really just your preference. They have the same result. And then finally, is null or not is null. This is to specify if a value is blank or not. You might be familiar with is blank. Just remember is null or not is null. Also, instead of using those null functions for numbers, 0 actually equates to a blank field. And then for text, just quotes with nothing in between specifies a blank text field. And these are my favorites. So if statements, like I said, very similar to Excel. It's really, if this condition is true, then do this, else do this. We will have an example with this. Actually, I think we have a handful, but you can also embed if statements within each other if you have more than one general condition that you want to address. One fun fact that a lot of people don't realize if you're used to Excel is that you actually don't need to include the if portion within your embedded if statements. You can just keep putting a comma. And like I said, we'll go through that just so you can get familiar with this as well. The other thing is, you can write formulas in one row. You can split them up like you do coding, if any of you all are familiar with that. For me personally, when you have a statement like an if statement, is I do like to split it up into multiple rows so that it's just easier to read. So if you see this last bullet here, we have 3 different rows, one with an embedded if statement and then with the final, else result in purple at the bottom. But that kind of just helps to break up the statement to make sure that it's actually addressing what you wanted to within your formula. And then case statements. So a lot of folks actually aren't aware of case statements because you could technically leverage if statements for practically anything that you would use case for. I would say though that case is much easier when you're evaluating one specific field. So for if statements, when you have multiple variables or conditions that you're evaluating, you can put that more easily in one formula, whereas a case statement evaluates the same field over and over again. So it just keeps it a bit cleaner. But you can really use whichever you're more comfortable with. We'll go through an example and I'll show you kind of what the formula would look like depending on which option you decide to go with, but that's really personal preference, whatever works best for you. All right, and you may recognize this view. This appears when you're adding fields to a table. I just wanted to point out all of the different types of formulas that exist within QuickBase. Obviously, we won't go through every single one, but we do have reference material that you can look at to figure out what best accommodates your needs in regards to what you want the output of a formula to be. And then this next slide might be a bit overwhelming. These are a list of functions and operators that I find the majority of folks when I did orientation really leveraged. Obviously, it's not expected that you memorize these by any means. There is a formula guide that's linked here and a bunch of reference material that Lee will go through that you can reference when you're trying to figure out exactly what operator or function you want to use. But these are good ones just to kind of have in the back of your head instead of having to reference that once you get more comfortable with formulas, so that you can just go ahead and start writing your formulas off the bat. And I think we have another survey, don't we, Lee? Awesome. So how are you feeling about the content? We'll go much slower through the examples because we want to make sure that you all can keep up and We know that not everyone has dual monitors, so we want to make sure that you all can navigate appropriately. And I think it'll click more when we actually go through those as well. Very cool. For the two of you that are very lost, keep asking questions and we'll try to address those as we go. Perfect. Oh, you might be on mute, Lee.
I was on mute.
Much better.
Thank you. All right, now we're getting to our very first exercise. And I wanted to do an example that just used some very basic elementary arithmetic. So say, for example, you have a warehouse and you have product in that warehouse, and customers want to purchase a certain quantity of that product. We want to calculate what that total cost will be. And so the fields that are listed with black text, those are the values that we have. The pink text, those are going to be our formulas that we can calculate and have them have QuickBase do it for us. So as we put in our quantity and our unit cost and our tax, we get our subtotal, tax, and total automatically. All right. And just to showcase that basic math, we can take a look here at how we are going to calculate our subtotal and our tax as well as our total. And on the right-hand side is kind of what it's going to look like in our formula in QuickBase. So now we're going to step into QuickBase, and I'm going to pull that up. And I'm going to showcase the app that we downloaded from the Exchange. So here, this is our Empower 2020 Introduction to Formulas app. And we start here on this home page. This is our dashboard. And this dashboard, we've provided some navigation to each of these exercises with these buttons. So by clicking on this blue button here, number 1, calculation, this takes us, this is now, here in our table, the calculations table, we have these various fields. We have our quantity, unit cost, subtotal, tax percentage, tax total. Notice some of these have values. Those are where we're going to hand enter the quantity as well as our unit cost. But we want QuickBase to automatically calculate that subtotal, tax, and total. Now, these fields have already been pre-built. However, we could always go to our settings here.
Hey, Lee, do you mind zooming in just a little bit?
Yes.
Thank you. Perfect.
Is that better? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So in our table settings, here we have our list of fields. And by clicking in here, we can now see what fields we currently have, and we can also add more if we needed. And how these formula fields were added previously, we just went to this New Fields button, and we found our type down at the bottom. We have all of these different formula fields. This is how we created our subtotal and our total and our tax. So here we have those here, and they're notated here as formulas. I can go in here, for example, for my subtotal, to modify the settings for this one particular field. And as you can see in our formula section, it's currently blank. So we need to calculate what our subtotal will be. I also want to showcase another way you can get to this same spot directly from our table. So for example, I'm going to exit my settings and I'm going to be back on my table view right here. And we see that my subtotal is not calculating. I can actually go to this section or this field header drop down and directly go into the field properties from here. That takes me back to that same screen. So now I want to begin typing in my formula. When I click inside this box, this Choose Field and Functions section appears. This gives me a list of either functions that I can select from or choose my existing fields. And so subtotal, we're going to, in order to calculate that, we're going to take our quantity, and that's our quantity field, and we want to multiply that by the unit cost. So our basic math, number of items we want times the unit cost should get us our subtotal. So I'm going to go ahead and save my new field formula. And here we see that the value is auto-calculating for us. So now I want to do something similar to get our tax amount. So if we're buying $90 worth of items and we have a 10% tax, we should probably see $9 in this section here. So I'm going to go back to my field properties. And now there's several different ways I can generate my formula. I want to take what I would think is the faster approach and leverage my new subtotal field. And I'm going to go take that and multiply that by the tax percentage. I'm going to save. So now I see that we have $9 worth of tax after purchasing $90 worth of material. So now we want to do a very similar thing where we want to get our total to populate. We want to combine our $90 and our $9 tax for our total. So I'm going to click here, go to my field properties, and when I click in this formula box area, I can choose my field or functions, and I want to choose my subtotal, and I want to add my tax and save. All right, so now we have our grand total of $99. I'm also going to showcase how this works when we add new records. So I'm actually going to use this grid edit feature right now because I want to add, say I'm going to purchase 4 items at $25 a piece and a tax percentage of 5%. You'll notice my formulas calculated all of that for me. So I'm buying 5 items at $29 with a 6% tax. So when I hit save, we now have all of these subtotals, tax, and totals calculating for us. Oops. So again, you can see here how we kind of wrote out that as far as doing the multiplication here for these different formulas. And then I want to double check. Alana, were we doing another question or that's later at the end?
So I believe we were going to take a poll to see how folks think the speed is.
Gotcha. And I'm pulling that up right now.
Yeah, I saw a few people in the chat are asking us to go a little slower.
A little slower. Okay.
So maybe going through that example again.
Yeah, I can quickly,
or even that.
Quickly, I will recap that exercise.
Even that second calculation for the total, just putting it all into one formula, that might be a nice summary.
Okay. So back here in our calculation table, we have the second total option. And one thing we could do, we could actually, ultimately we could calculate all of this in one formula field, rather than relying on my subtotal and my tax to get my total. So here, I'm going to click in here and go to our field properties. And I'm going to go ahead and take my quantity times my unit price. And you'll notice whenever you click outside this box, that little window disappears. If you just click back in here, it'll pop up again. And our order of operations, so now so we're doing our quantity, unit cost to get our subtotal. And now we want to multiply that by our tax percentage. And then we want to so now that should.
I see a few folks have questions about parentheses, Lee, so sorry to jump in, but just so they understand the difference between the parentheses for a function versus, in this case, this is for order of operations to make sure that you're multiplying the quantity by the unit cost, you know, before you add the actual, the subtotal practically. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Lee, but just wanted to address that.
Yeah, and just with the order of operations, without, it just, in order to ensure that I calculate my tax percentage properly and not just on the unit cost, but I want to do it with the quantity and unit cost so that I get the full value there. So when I hit save, I now have one field that was using our quantity, our unit cost, and our tax percentage to return that overall total. All right, so now we can move on to the second exercise. Alana, sound good? Okay.
Yes.
I'm just jumping back and forth between PowerPoint. Okay, so we have 3 more exercises that I'll go over. One is involving days of the week. Another is involving durations. And then another is creating what like an expiration date. So these are different ways to calculate based on days, durations, and dates. So I'm going to jump back into QuickBase. And I went back to our dashboard with the home. In our dashboard here, I'm going to go to our exercise number 2, the days of the week. And in this particular exercise, we're just simply wanting to take whatever the value is in the start date and show the date that's 1 week later. So when we think of the math, it'd be adding 7 days to this particular date. But now we're going to get into using our functions in the formula. So here, this field properties, when we're in here, I can't just take the start date plus 7. You'll notice this little yellow thing is highlighted, and it's saying we can't just add a number, the number to a date, because they're 2 different types. So what we need to do is we need to somehow make this 7 more relatable to this date field. So in our select a function section here, this select a function, I can go find ways of converting or changing that 7 to help, and I want to say it was 2 days. Yeah. So going all the way down here, let's see here. Sorry, Alana, I forgot my conversion here. I'm searching for my notes. Days, sorry. 2 days, we have a lot of similar looking functions. So, okay.
This is when the description comes in extremely handy.
Yeah. here we go. So days. So what it's explaining is that when you wrap the number in here, it's actually going to return a duration value. And this translates better when we're trying to add to a date. By inserting this here, it's pre-filling by saying you need to, this is where you would want to enter your number. So if I just remove that, my yellow error goes away. So now I can add my 7 days to my start date. So I've converted that 7 to a duration here. When I hit save, I now see a calculated value of 1010, which is 7 days after 10/3. So we'll definitely go into those functions and conversions in the next 2 exercises as well. Very quickly, I'm just going to showcase, again, you can still see how that value changes. So when I use today, that calculated 7 days in the future.
And Lee, do you mind going back to the formula real quick just to let folks see?
So going back here to my field properties, I'm taking my start date, so the value in that field that we populated, and I'm converting this number 7 to a duration so that it knows to add 7 days to this start date. Okay. All right, shall we move on to the third exercise, Alana?
I think so.
Okay. So I'm going to exit my settings here. I'm going to click on my home, navigate back to the dashboard. And number 3, durations. So we kind of dealt with durations, but now we want to calculate how many days in between 2 date fields. And again, got a little bit different of a format with this start date. It's actually a date time field. So I'll showcase how we need to convert this. Going into my duration field properties, I would normally just say, take your finish date minus your start date to calculate that duration in between those 2 values. But again, I got my little yellow error saying I cannot do this because they're mismatched. One's a date time, the other is a date field. And my start date is the one that had date time. So again, I can go select a function and I can convert that date time to just a date. And let's see here, that's 2 days, to date. Okay, so we have 3 of these 2 dates. Each one will showcase the example, but this third one is indicating here that if you put a date time value and bracket this in here, we'll convert that date time to just a date field. So that's precisely what we want to do. So I'm going to click insert, and now what I've done here is my start date is now within this function, the to date, to convert that to just a day, basically drops off the time. And now my finish minus start date should give me my duration, days in between. So when I save, I can now calculate that there were 11 days between my start and my finish date. Alana, how was that?
I don't see any questions on it, so I think we're good.
All right. So I'll move on to the fourth exercise, which is creating an expiration date. And we purposefully use this numeric field because we want to showcase more of those functions. But here we just want to automatically calculate whatever is in our start date. We want the value that's 6 months later. So again, we can't just use the number 6. We need to help QuickBase understand that we mean months. So I'm going to click here to our field properties.
And Lee, I'm sorry to bug you again. Do you mind zooming in just one more zoom?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. All right. And so here in my expiration date formula field, I want to convert that 6 number to months. So I'm going to go select a function and try to find what might do that. I want to also showcase that this all functions is listing all of them together, but you can also find them grouped. So this is a little easier way to narrow down what it is we're looking for. I believe we're going to look for the month function. Okay. So this is going to return, and just double checking, Alana, am I correct in that I'm using month?
Adjust month.
Adjust month. So close, but not it. So if I go back up to adjust month, there we go. This is going to actually be a 2-part function where I need to provide a date field as well as my number value so that it returns a date that many months in the future. So I'm going to insert this, and again, this is kind of showcasing where to put each bit of information. So I'm going to choose my date field, which is my start date, and it covered over that example. And then here I'm going to do the same thing by selecting that and choose my length in months. My error went away, and it shows that I've met the conditions of this function. So we're adjusting the month with our start date and adding the length in months. So when I hit save, we can now see that from this date, we now have a date value that's 6 months in the future from that start date. Okay, those were the 4 exercises that I had. Now I'm going to get into troubleshooting. All right, so it is just an unfortunate thing when building formulas. If we use wrong punctuation or the wrong function itself that I was selecting, we're going to get error messages. And so there's lots of different ways to figure out where the problem is with your formula. So syntax errors, simply I may have missed a comma, or maybe my quotes were the curly quotes from a copy paste as opposed to my direct single quote or my straight quotes from my keyboard, or maybe I didn't close all my parentheses. A Boolean error is when the formula does not meet the conditions of the statement. Oh, sorry, I forgot. Let me go back to that syntax errors because we have a couple examples. So that first one, with that not started, we did not encapsulate it in quotes, and therefore the system didn't know that we were actually referring to text. So when we put the not started in the quotes, that then helped QuickBase recognize that we were referring to the text. So if you have a status called not started, it's looking to equal that. With the Boolean error, this is where the conditions aren't being met. And so here, for example, I'm trying to add 2 checkbox values together. Checkboxes aren't initially a value, so we would have to convert them to a number. And so by converting them with our functions here, we could convert them, checkboxes, to represent 1 or 0, 1 being true, 0 being false. And then a type mismatch, making sure that the field type output So that was definitely what we were experiencing when we were trying to work with date and date time. So we had to convert it to date as we did in our exercise. And then whenever you have no error and the formula is not working, there could be something like a null value in one of the source fields. There could be a type mismatch, but I'll showcase a lot more as far as resources to help you. So here we have a list of different resources, and I will showcase them here in my browser. So the first is the QuickBase help. So help.quickbase.com formulas will have a ton of information to kind of walk you through what is a formula, how to utilize it, the building blocks, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of info here. We also have this formula functions reference app that lists all of those functions that we were going through. So this can be searched and used to help find what it is you're looking for. And then there's also sample formulas in here as well, which are very handy to kind of, all of this you can kind of copy and paste and tweak if you need. And our presentation will have all of these links. So later when we post the content, you'll also be able to access them through this. And I believe we also have, they might be on the sample app as well. The embedded reference guide, that was when we were typing out our formula and we'd get that little yellow highlighted error, that's our embedded reference guide. We're trying to walk you through what we think might be the problem in your formula. We also have QuickBase community. And so the QuickBase community, people are posting questions all the time and people are chiming in with answers. And I brought one up specifically that I reference fairly frequently actually, because there's this question where somebody said, I have all my states are listed with the abbreviation, just 2 characters. I would like a formula to return, the full state name. And thankfully, other people have already built that, so we don't have to build it ourselves. That's 50 states. That's a lot of lines. And so down here, we can find somebody took the time to write out this formula, and they're actually doing the opposite. They're saying when we have the full state listed, we want to return the 2-state abbreviation. So that's super helpful. You can just copy paste that. But additionally, further down, somebody took the time to reverse engineer it as well. So if you'd rather, convert your two-digit, you can do the full state listing. So it's, again, just a handy place, the QuickBase community, to find people's existing formulas or get help by asking maybe how to do it, or post the formula that's not working and people will chime in and try to help out. We also have webinars. And so you can sign up here at quickbase.com/webinars and Office Hours with Kirk. He's a phenomenal resource to leverage. And then we have other content on demand, as well as QuickBase University. And QuickBase University, so university.quickbase.com, we have plenty, we have live trainings, as well as all of our Empower content is posted here. And there's many different spots within this for help with formulas. And then last, our care team. So when you're in QuickBase, this little question mark here for help, manage support cases, you can always put in a support ticket for help with our care team. All right, and Alana, I'm gonna pass this on to you.
Awesome. All right. All right, right, Lee, can you see my Exchange app?
I can.
Awesome. And one thing before I start going through these examples, to reiterate what I see a few folks commenting on in the chat, is formulas just take practice. There are a lot of iterations. There are a lot of ways to do the same thing. Certain things will just, come easier to you than others, and just keep practicing. The community is a great resource, as well as QuickBase help, just so you can see examples and see how other people kind of process how they would develop a formula to get the result that you want. So it's great to see these examples. Obviously, Lee and I only came up with really 8 that showcase a handful of functionality that's great for you, but there's much more that we're not getting into that would also be great for you all to have access to. All right, so we will go ahead and start with exercise 5. And in this example, what we want to do is check a box when the status goes from outstanding to complete. So when the box is checked, that means that the task is complete. So we'll go into the properties. And actually, I may have said that backwards. It's when complete is checked, then we want to say that this is completed. So first of all, what you will see here is that this formula field is actually a text field, because we want the result to either say complete or outstanding. And when we are thinking through how we want to do this, since we want to evaluate the complete field, which is a checkbox, we need to make sure we know how to specify when a checkbox is checked or unchecked. So in QuickBase terms, when the checkbox is checked, that equals true. When the checkbox is not checked, that's false. So we're gonna go ahead and do an if statement this time. And we will say complete, so that's the checkbox field. So when the checkbox field is checked, meaning true, then we want to print the word complete. And since this is the second part of the if statement, this is the else portion, meaning when the complete box is not checked, we want it to say outstanding. So to go through this again, everything is embedded within one if statement. We're saying when the complete checkbox is checked, print complete. If it's not checked, print outstanding. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And we see here, so task 1, the checkbox is checked and the status is complete. And for the second task, not complete, so the status is outstanding. All right. I don't see any questions right now, so I'm going to keep going so that we have time for our Q&A at the end. So we'll go to number 6 for name formats. So this one I am going to show you all 2 different options. Once again, personal preference, however you want the result to appear, it's really up to you all. But what we want to do here is pretty much concatenate the first and last name fields, but do it flip. So do last name, comma, first name. So we'll go to field properties of full name. And we also wanted to show you all here, if any of you all are familiar with any sort of coding or just documenting anything that you're doing within an application, like in QuickBase, is that you can comment your code or your formula. So if you're working with other builders within an application, or if you just want to make sure that you recall why you built the formula or what the purpose of it is, if you just do 2 slashes, you see right here, this comment, it's grayed out. So it has nothing to do with the actual output. It's more just for your reference. So that's kind of a fun thing that I use pretty heavily when I'm collaborating with colleagues, so that we know what other people are doing and we don't get too lost with this. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll look at the existing formula, and it is just concatenating the first name and last name. So the way that you do that is you have the ampersands and the quotes right here. The quotes, you'll notice that there's a space in between. That's what allows for the space between first name and last name. So if we wanted to kind of take that same approach and just do last name, comma, first name, what we would do is we would pull in the last name field. We would do an ampersand, quote, comma, space. And then to close that part out, we would then do another ampersand and add the first name. Now you'll notice here, last name is highlighted in yellow. There's nothing wrong with how this piece of the formula is written. It's just because we have two formulas in one formula box that the system doesn't know how to read. So we want to comment out what used to be there because we're obviously not using that anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And now you'll see we have last name, comma, first name. So I'm going to show you all one other trick that would be helpful in a different scenario. So let me go ahead and just add another field. And you all don't have to do this with me. I just would like to show you another function that could come in handy. So there is another function that is called list. And what that allows you to do, similar to doing the ampersands and the quotes, is that also kind of concatenates fields together with whatever delimiter you actually apply. So in our case, we will just use a comma. But the list function is better when you could potentially have fields you're concatenating that are blank so that it doesn't include extra spaces where you may not want them. So in this example, I'll go back to our full name field and say that we want to just do first name, middle name, last name. So I'm going to go ahead and add the middle name here. It might be difficult to see, but there are actually two spaces in between Jane and Doe right now. And that is because the system is calling out this space between the first name, middle name, and middle name, last name, even though there's no middle name. So how to avoid the double space? Oh, I love it. That's exactly where we're going. So what we would do is we would use the list function. And in this case, if you didn't want to have a comma separating, the first name from the middle name to the last name, you would just do parentheses with a space. And then you would pull in first name, middle name.
Hey, Alana, can you also zoom in on your screen just a little bit more?
Oh, of course. And here, I'll extend this as well. Okay, so I'll stop here so that you all can see this. So the actual exercise was to just do last name, comma, first name. The list function is great when you have more than two variables that you're analyzing. So in this case, the plan would be if you have a middle name present, it would be first name space, middle name space, last name. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And you'll notice here now there's only one space. The system recognizes that there's no middle name. So if I go here and just add a middle name, you'll see there's a space between all of these. And yes, I will go back to the formula. So this is what we ended with. So the list function is saying between all of these variables, we want to just have a space. And the first name, middle name, and last name variables are the one that we want to print. Awesome. All right. So we will go to our project status example. I believe we have one more after this. So what we want to do here is we want to check the overdue checkbox if the due date is in the past and if the status is not yet completed. So we're going to do this in two parts just so you all can see how to have more than one condition within a formula. So we will go to the field properties for overdue. As you'll see, this is a formula checkbox. So similar to when we were evaluating one of the prior examples, checked is true, unchecked is false. So we're going to go ahead and do an if statement again. And we'll start just with the first part of our function. So we want to say if the due date is in the past, then potentially this is overdue. So we will say due date. And in the past, another way to say that is if it's before today, and that is actually a function within QuickBase. So I just want to do less than today with an open parentheses and a closed parentheses. That's just the today function. So if the due date is before today, then check the overdue checkbox, meaning make it true, or else we'll make it false. And I'm gonna hit save, but I'll come back to this. So we see that there are certain instances where the checkbox is checked. However, we're missing something here, right? Because we see that the status is completed for two of these, even though the date is in the past. So let's go back. We need to add the other parameter for status. And if we wanted anything that was today to be considered overdue, we would just add an equal sign. So that's really up to you all with whatever conditions you're using for your formula. So if the due date is before today and if the status is not complete, and you see we use the quotes to specify text, then check the overdue box or else keep it unchecked. So this is saying that we need both of these conditions to be true in order for the overdue checkbox to be checked. And this looks right. So these are all in the past and they are not completed. This one that's in progress isn't due until the end of the year. Now, one thing that I will point out that is, once again, personal preference, since a checkbox is considered Boolean, as in, binary in a way, so it's either true or false, you technically don't need to make this an if statement. I personally just like having the if statement so that I know that that's truly what I'm quantifying. But another way that you could write this, let me just copy it, is removing the if statement, not even showing the true or false, and just keeping it as this. So because the checkbox is either true or false, the system knows as the formula, when these two conditions are valid, check the box. So if I hit save, you'll see that the result is the same with the if statement versus with the with no if statement. Great. All right, there's one more example we want to go through, and then I'll make sure that we have time for the Q&A. So we will go to our status example. This one's a bit more complex, but I did want to make sure that we call out the difference between an if and a case statement, just so you all can become familiar with when you can use either, or when you just prefer to. So what we want to show here is when percent complete is 0, mark the status as not started. When it's at 100% complete, mark it as complete. Or if it's anywhere between 0 and 100, mark it as in progress. So we will go to the field properties of the status. And we will start with what we've done before. So we'll go ahead and do an if statement. So in this case, we're saying if percent complete is 0, as in 0%, then we want the status to be not started. And I'm going to break this up so it's a bit easier to read. Now we want to say, so this goes toward an embedded if statement like I mentioned, so you don't need to say if every single time like you do in Excel. We're really just rewriting another condition with a result. So if percent complete is equal to 1, meaning 100, mark it as complete. Else, we want the status to be in progress. This is assuming no one marks a negative percentage or a percentage above 100%. So there are other parameters that you could put in here to make sure that you can't save the record if the percentage isn't valid. But in our case, we're just assuming everyone's inputting it correctly. So once again, if the percent complete is 0%, mark the record as not started. If the percent complete is 100%, mark it as complete. If it's somewhere in between, then we will write in progress. So let's go ahead and save and see how that worked. Awesome. All right, so to show you all how you could do a case statement for the same thing, let me go ahead and just make this easier to comment out. Okay, so as I said, a case statement, I like to use that when you're really just evaluating one variable, which would be percent complete. So we'll start with case. Percent complete. So because we're evaluating one variable, we actually do a comma here and we say what the percent complete might be in the first condition. So 0, 0%, not started, like what we did for the if statement. If percent complete is 1, numerically as in 100%, then complete. And then if it's neither of these, just like our if statement, in progress. So the main difference between the if statement and the case statement is that you only have to write out percent complete once, and you're evaluating that variable in all of your different results. So let me go ahead and hit save. And we get the same result. So this is where I would say definitely personal preference. I just find case to be a bit cleaner when you're evaluating one variable. So I go with that. Lee, is there anything I should address before we go back to the PowerPoint?
No, I think we should do some questions.
Awesome. And actually one quick thing, just because I know you all may see that there are other tables within our app. Those were in our appendix depending on how much time we had. If you all try to go through that on your own and get stuck, On the homepage of the app, you'll see that we do have a step-by-step guide that does go through those examples as well. So you can reference those when you want to see what the answers are, or one of the many options that you have. All right. So just wanted to remind everyone, Rose should be pasting in a survey for you all to fill out. If you all don't mind doing so, just to provide us feedback on this session, that would be great. And I think we're ready for a Q&A. Let's see. Oh, sorry, Lori. Can you show that formula one more time? I'm assuming you're asking about the last formula that I did. Let me, I'll go ahead and paste in the two options for you. One for the case and one for the if statement. And like I said, all of these answers are included in the Exchange app as well if you all wanted to reference that once we're no longer in the session. All right. The team must have been doing awesome answering these questions during the session.
We can take a few minutes to see if any more questions come in because we have about 5 minutes left, but we do have a hard stop at 4:15. So if there isn't anything, people can always reach out via Slack with any questions that they might have.
Definitely.
And again, I can't stress enough the QuickBase community for formula help, because chances are somebody's already made it and posted it. And I love copying and pasting rather than creating from scratch. And then there's also ways you can tweak. So if somebody has a mostly complete formula that fits your use case, I like to learn by picking it apart and kind of seeing how others have done something. That usually helps me in my learning.
Definitely. Yeah, I would say the community, it's kind of fun to see how other people's brains work to help spark ideas that you have as well.
Mm-hmm. Alana, would you like to talk about a multi-select formula?
I'm trying to think of a good example that we could show. For that one.
I definitely, as a personal preference, I shy away from multi-select. I usually like to use child tables, but I know they're heavily used, and so I'm sure we could come up with something.
Do you have a specific use case, Matt, that you're thinking about using a multi-select formula for? That might help us. Give them a second. Matt, if you have that example and you would like to chat myself or Lee in the Slack channel, we could actually go through that with you.
Alana, inside Magic Buttons in the App Exchange, any of the project records has a tab for multi-select and checkboxes that you might use as an example.
Oh, let me see.
While Alana's pulling that up, I'll just plug. Kirk built the Magic Buttons application, and if you have not seen that, I highly suggest getting that app from the Exchange. It's a treasure trove of information, and I've been using it back when I was a customer. I still use it to this day.
And Kirk, you said where
click
was
on
this?
any of the projects in that first report there. And then at the top, the tabs will come up, and there is something called Is this a new version of Magic Buttons? Because I update it all the time. I'm not sure
There's
if
the count
I'm
multi-select.
seeing it. Do you see there it is. Count
Multi-select.
multi-select. So these check boxes, when they're checked, become multi-select values as you check them. So if you edit this and start checking check boxes, you'll see the formula where it says selections made. You check it, and it keeps changing and adding to the multi-select.
So here, so if I go to the field properties,
Ah,
and see the list function, we did that, awesome. And then, right, so this is saying when each of those specific state checkboxes are true, then print the state name.
And a multi-select wants to be delimited by that semicolon there. So that's what that adds to it.
Right. And the link for the Magic Buttons app, so this is in the Exchange. If you all just search Magic Buttons, you'll see this pop up. This is a really helpful example. Awesome.